The gavel cracks. Her crimson nails drum. The air conditioner hisses as the judge rips off his glasses. I spent 45 years stitching for a son forging my death. $897 million under a buried name. A prepaid coffin. Plot 247. He recognizes me, and what follows ruins them. You won't inherit anything, Dorothy. The words from my daughter-in-law exploded in the silence of the courtroom. She smiled with that practiced sweetness that never reached her eyes, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her designer purse. My son August avoided my gaze, his shoulders hunched like a guilty child. And there, in that moment, I made the decision that would change everything. Because what they didn't know, what nobody in that room could imagine, is that I had $900 million hidden behind a name I'd buried 45 years ago, and I was about to destroy their lives. My name is Dorothy Sanders. I'm 71 years old, and this is the story of how a poor old seamstress crushed the family that tried to steal from her. I'm so grateful you're here listening to my story. You know, when I decided to tell this, I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, or if you know someone who needs to hear that it's possible to fight back, please hit that like button. While I tell you the rest, if you could subscribe to the channel, it would help me so much. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far these stories are reaching. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened when that gavel came down. The Harris County Courthouse felt like a tomb that December morning. I sat in the back row wearing my best navy dress, the one I'd sewn myself with trembling fingers 3 nights before. My hands, weathered from decades of needlework, clutched a small black purse that contained everything I owned. Or so everyone believed. August stood at the plaintiff's table in his cheap suit, the one Bruna had probably picked out to make him look respectable. At 42, my son had the hollow look of a man drowning in debts he couldn't pay. Beside him, Bruna posed like she was at a photo shoot, her bleached hair perfectly styled, her lips painted that aggressive red she thought made her look sophisticated. Your Honor, August's lawyer was saying, Mrs. Sanders clearly suffers from dementia. Just last week, she put a hot iron in the refrigerator. I wanted to laugh. The iron story was Bruna's invention, rehearsed and polished like everything else about her. But I sat silent, playing the confused old woman they needed me to be. She forgets to eat, Bruna added, with fake tears glistening in her eyes. Sometimes we find her wandering the neighborhood in her nightgown, not knowing where she is. More lies. But the judge, Henry Salles, according to his nameplate, was listening intently. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. Mrs. Sanders, Judge Salles addressed me directly. How do you feel about your son's petition for guardianship? I stood slowly, my knees creaking like old floorboards. I feel confused, Your Honor. I don't understand why August thinks I can't take care of myself. The performance was perfect. Hesitant voice, uncertain posture, the picture of a vulnerable elderly woman. August relaxed slightly. Bruna's smile grew wider. That's when Judge Salles did something unexpected. He removed his glasses and stared at me with growing intensity. His face went pale, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of his desk. My God, he whispered. Dorothy Whitmore? The courtroom fell silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming, the rustle of papers, my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I'm sorry, Your Honor, August's lawyer stammered. Judge Salles ignored him completely. His eyes were locked on mine, and I saw the exact moment recognition hit him like a freight train. Dorothy Whitmore, he repeated, louder this time. You disappeared from Boston in 1979. The entire Whitmore family has been searching for you for over 4 decades. I felt my carefully constructed mask beginning to crack. 45 years of hiding, of pretending to be someone else. And it all came crashing down because of a man I'd met once at a charity gala when I was 26. Your Honor? Bruna interrupted, her voice sharp with panic. I think there's been some mistake. This is Dorothy Sanders, a retired seamstress from... No mistake, Judge Salles said firmly. He was shuffling through papers now, his movements quick and urgent. I've been the executor of the Whitmore Trust for 15 years. The will is very specific. The entire estate remains untouched until Dorothy Whitmore is found alive and competent." The words hit the room like bombs. August's face went from confusion to terror. Bruna's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the way her skin turned ashy gray. The moment I truly understood what my son had become happened 3 days after the courthouse revelation. I was sitting in Mark Crawford's corner office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Houston, when his investigator walked in with a manila folder that would change everything. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Ray Murphy said, settling his large frame into the leather chair across from me. "What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to hear." Mark leaned forward, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. At 68, he was one of Houston's most respected attorneys, a man who'd built his reputation defending the vulnerable against the powerful. When I'd walked into his office that morning, he'd listened to my story with the intensity of a surgeon examining a patient. "Show me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Ray opened the folder and spread out printed text messages across the mahogany table. "These are from August's phone. We obtained them through legal channels after filing the emergency protective order." The first message was from Bruna to August, dated 2 weeks before their guardianship petition. "The old bat has more money stashed than we thought. Found bank statements in her sewing room. $47,000 in savings. Plus, the house is worth at least $180K. If we get guardianship, we can liquidate everything." August's response made my hands tremble. "Good. Mickey Torino wants his money by Christmas or things get ugly. $230K is a lot to owe to people like that." "Mickey Torino," Ray explained, "runs an illegal sports betting operation connected to the Castellano crime family. Your son borrowed money he couldn't repay to fund his gambling addiction." I stared at the messages, each word hitting me like a physical blow. But Ray wasn't finished. "There's more, Mrs. Whitmore. Much more." The next series of messages revealed the true scope of their plan. Bruna had researched nursing homes in rural East Texas, specifically looking for facilities with poor inspection records and minimal family visitation policies. "Found the perfect place," she'd written. "Sunset Manor in Carthage, 4 hours drive. No cameras in rooms. Staff turnover every 6 months so no one gets attached to residents. Perfect for a confused old woman who might not survive the stress of relocation." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. They weren't just planning to steal from me. They were planning to kill me. "The sleeping pills," I whispered, remembering what the investigators had found earlier. Mark nodded grimly. "Bruna purchased them 3 days before your court hearing. The plan was to drug your morning coffee, making you appear confused and disoriented in front of Judge Sal's." Ray turned to another page. "But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Look at this conversation from last month." August's message read, "How long do you think it would take, once we get her to Carthage?" Bruna's reply, "Old people die from broken hearts all the time, especially when they're separated from everything familiar. Give it 6 months, maybe less. Then we're free and clear." My vision blurred. For 45 years, I'd hidden from wealth and power, choosing love over money, simplicity over status. I'd raised August with tenderness, sacrificing my own comfort to give him opportunities. I'd welcomed Bruna into our family, treated her like the daughter I'd never had. And they'd repaid me by planning my murder. "There's one more thing," Ray said quietly. "We traced their financial records. They've already spent money they don't have, anticipating your death." He showed me credit card statements and loan documents. In the past 6 months, August and Bruna had accumulated debts totaling $340,000. A new BMW for her, expensive suits for him, jewelry that cost more than most people's annual salary, vacations to Las Vegas and Miami, where August had lost thousands more at casino tables. "They bought a coffin," Mark said, his voice heavy with disgust. "Prepaid funeral arrangements at Greenwood Cemetery, plot number 247, right next to your late husband, Michael." The irony was crushing. They'd already buried me in their minds, already divided up my possessions, already planned their new life funded by my death. "How long have they been planning this?" I asked. Ray consulted his notes. "Based on the digital trail, approximately 18 months. It started small. August borrowing money for what he called business investments. But the gambling addiction escalated quickly. By last spring, they realized they needed a permanent solution to their financial problems. I thought about all the times Bruna had visited me in recent months, how she'd insisted on making my coffee, how she'd suggested I see a doctor for memory issues I'd never experienced, how August had started talking about my confusion and forgetfulness in front of neighbors and friends, laying the groundwork for their legal case. The doctor's appointment, I said suddenly. 3 weeks ago, Bruna insisted I see Dr. Harrison for a checkup. She drove me there, sat in the room during the examination. Mark's eyes sharpened. What happened during that appointment? Dr. Harrison asked strange questions about my memory, my ability to make decisions. Bruna kept interjecting, saying I'd been having episodes at home. She even brought a notebook where she'd supposedly recorded incidents of my confusion. Ray was already making notes. We need to interview Dr. Harrison. If they were building a medical case for incompetency. They were thorough, Mark said admiringly, though his tone held no warmth. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a calculated long-term plan to systematically destroy an elderly woman's life. I stood up from the conference table and walked to the window, looking down at the busy streets below. Thousands of people going about their lives, unaware that in this glass tower we were unraveling a conspiracy that would have resulted in my death. Mrs. Whitmore, Mark said gently, I know this is overwhelming, but you have resources now that they never anticipated. We can protect you, and we can make sure they face consequences for what they've done. I turned back to face him. What kind of consequences? Attempted murder, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false legal documents. Between the federal charges and state charges, they're looking at 20 to 30 years in prison. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. Not the sweet, harmless smile I'd perfected over decades of hiding, but something sharper. Something that would have made my Boston society mother proud. Mr. Crawford, I said, I want you to understand something. For 45 years, I've been Dorothy Sanders, the quiet seamstress who minded her own business. But before that, I was Dorothy Whitmore, and the Whitmore family didn't build an empire by being passive victims. Mark leaned back in his chair, and I saw something like anticipation in his eyes. I don't just want consequences, I continued. I want them to understand exactly what they tried to steal from. And I want everyone watching to know that trying to murder an elderly woman for her money is the stupidest mistake they could possibly make. Ray grinned. What did you have in mind? A very public trial, I said, with very public consequences, and a very educational outcome for anyone else who thinks elderly people are easy targets. As I left Crawford's office that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The thrill of being underestimated by people who had no idea who they were really dealing with. August and Bruna thought they were stealing from a helpless old woman. They were about to discover they'd tried to murder one of the wealthiest and most dangerous women in America. The war room that Mark Crawford assembled for my case looked like something from a crime thriller. On the 20th floor of his downtown Houston office building, we'd converted an entire conference room into our command center. Wall-mounted monitors displayed financial records, phone logs, and surveillance footage. A timeline stretched across one wall, tracking August and Bruna's conspiracy from its inception 18 months ago to their planned execution just weeks away. But what struck me most was the team Mark had assembled. These weren't just lawyers, they were specialists in elder abuse, financial crimes, and organized crime connections. Each person in that room had chosen to work on my case, not just for the money, but because what August and Bruna had attempted represented something that infuriated them professionally and personally. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark announced to the assembled team on our third day of preparation, we're not just building a criminal case. We're sending a message that will reverberate through every courthouse in Texas. Detective Ray Murphy had brought reinforcements from the Harris County Sheriff's Office. FBI agent Sarah Chen joined us when the investigation revealed interstate elements, August's gambling debts connected to crime families operating across state lines. Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatric psychiatrist, was documenting the psychological abuse tactics they'd employed. And most importantly, retired federal judge Harrison Mitchell had volunteered to serve as our strategic advisor. The evidence we've gathered in 72 hours, Judge Mitchell said, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed our files, represents one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases I've seen in 30 years on the bench. I sat at the head of the conference table, still wearing my simple cardigans and homemade dresses, but feeling more powerful than I had since my Boston debutante days. Every morning, I arrived at the office at 8 sharp, ready to dissect another layer of my son's betrayal. Bomba. 1. The medical conspiracy. Dr. Williams had spent 2 days investigating Dr. Harrison's examination of me. What she discovered made my blood pressure spike dangerously. "Dorothy," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Dr. Harrison wasn't conducting a legitimate medical evaluation. He was paid $5,000 by August to create false documentation of cognitive decline." She spread medical records across the table. "Look at these notes from your appointment. Patient shows signs of confusion when asked about current events." But the questions he asked weren't about current events. They were about obscure historical details no reasonable person would know off the top of their head. Agent Chen leaned forward. "We interviewed Dr. Harrison yesterday. Initially, he maintained his professional ethics, but when we showed him the financial trail, the $5,000 payment from August's account to his personal checking account, he broke down completely." "He confessed?" I asked. "More than confessed. He provided us with documentation of the entire scheme. August approached him 6 months ago with what he called a family intervention, claimed you were becoming dangerous to yourself and others, but that you were too proud to admit you needed help." Ray Murphy slid a cassette recorder across the table. "Dr. Harrison agreed to wear a wire during his second meeting with August. Listen to this." He pressed play, and my son's voice filled the room, discussing me like I was livestock being prepared for slaughter. "The old woman's tougher than we expected," August said. "She keeps asking questions about the medical evaluation. We need something more definitive." "What are you suggesting?" Dr. Harrison asked. "Can you prescribe something that would make her actually confused? Just temporarily? For the court hearing?" "That would be unethical and illegal." "Doctor, we're talking about preventing a confused elderly woman from hurting herself. Isn't temporary medication better than letting her burn the house down because she forgot to turn off the stove?" I had never left the stove on. Not once in 71 years. The recording continued with August describing incidents that had never happened, symptoms I'd never displayed, and dangers I'd never posed. By the end of the 20-minute conversation, he'd painted me as a woman on the verge of complete mental collapse. Dr. Williams stopped the recording. "This represents criminal conspiracy to commit medical fraud, elderly abuse, and attempted drugging of a patient without consent." But I could see from everyone's expressions that there was more. Bomba 2. The real estate fraud. FBI agent Chen had been investigating August and Bruna's financial activities with the thoroughness of someone building a RICO case. What she discovered went far beyond gambling debts. "Dorothy, they didn't just plan to steal your house," she said, opening a thick folder of documents. "They'd already sold it." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean, sold it?" 3 weeks ago, August forged your signature on a quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of your property to a shell company called Sanders Family Holdings. Yesterday, that company sold your house to a developer for $180,000. Mark Crawford's jaw tightened. "Show her the contracts." Agent Chen spread out paperwork that made my hands shake. Purchase agreements, title transfers, even architectural plans for the luxury townhomes that would replace my small house. The house where Michael and I had spent 43 years building our life together. "The closing was scheduled for next Friday," she continued. "The same day August planned to have you committed to Sunset Manor." "But how is that possible?" I asked. "I never signed anything." Ray Murphy produced a magnifying glass and showed me the forged signature. "August practiced your handwriting for months. Look at these practice sheets we found in his apartment." Page after page showed my name, written in August's careful script, each iteration getting closer to my actual signature. Hours of practice, preparing to steal my home while planning my death. "The buyer is already planning demolition," Agent Chen said. "Your house, your garden, the oak tree Michael planted when August was born, it would all be destroyed by Christmas." I thought about my sewing room, where I'd created thousands of garments over the decades. The kitchen where Michael had made coffee every morning for 43 years. The bedroom where he died peacefully in his sleep, holding my hand. They weren't just stealing my money. They were erasing my entire history. "There's more," Agent Chen said quietly. "The shell company August created, It's been active for 8 months. This isn't the first property they've stolen. She showed me records of 2 other elderly victims in Harris County. August and Bruna had befriended them, gained their trust, then systematically stolen their homes using the same forged document techniques. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, age 79, lost her family farm worth $340,000. Mr. James Chen, age 84, lost his apartment building worth $520,000. Both victims died within 6 months of being placed in substandard nursing facilities. The pattern was clear. August and Bruna weren't just thieves. They were serial killers who used legal documents instead of weapons. Bomba 3. The Life Insurance Discovery. On our 5th day of investigation, Detective Murphy made a discovery that transformed our case from elder abuse to attempted first-degree murder. "Dorothy," he said, his voice grim as he entered our war room carrying a manila envelope, "you need to sit down for this." Judge Mitchell and Mark Crawford flanked me as Ray opened the envelope and pulled out an insurance policy with my name printed across the top in bold letters. "Life insurance policy," he said. "Taken out on you 18 months ago. Face value, $2 million. I stared at the document, my vision blurring as the implications sank in. "I never applied for life insurance. August forged your application. Used the same handwriting practice techniques we found with the real estate documents. But here's the crucial detail. He listed himself and Bruna as equal beneficiaries." Mark Crawford was already reaching for his phone. "This changes everything. This isn't elder abuse anymore. This is conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain." Agent Chen leaned over my shoulder to examine the policy. "Look at the timing. They applied for maximum coverage right after August's gambling debts reached critical levels. The $2 million in life insurance, plus your house, plus your savings, they calculated exactly how much money they needed to disappear." Dr. Williams spoke up from across the table. "Dorothy, did you notice any changes in their behavior around 18 months ago? Any new interest in your health, your daily routines?" I thought back, my memory sharpening as pieces fell into place. "Bruna started bringing me vitamins. Said I needed to be healthier. She'd watch me take them every day." "What kind of vitamins?" Dr. Williams asked urgently. "Little white pills. She said they were calcium supplements for my bones." Ray Murphy was already making notes. "We need to test those pills. If they were gradually poisoning you to create medical symptoms that would support the incompetency case." The thought made me nauseous. Every kindness from Bruna had been calculated. Every health concern had been part of their murder plot. When she insisted on driving me to doctor's appointments, when she encouraged me to take daily walks in isolated areas, when she suggested I stop driving because of my poor eyesight, it had all been preparation for my death. "The insurance policy requires a waiting period," Judge Mitchell observed, studying the fine print. "No payouts for deaths within the first 2 years unless the death is accidental." "Which explains the nursing home plan," Mark concluded. "An elderly woman dying from neglect or accident at a substandard facility wouldn't trigger the suicide investigation that would void the policy." Agent Chen was cross-referencing dates on her laptop. "The 2-year anniversary of this policy is January 15th. If you had died any time after that date, they would have collected $2 million, no questions asked. 6 weeks away. I had been 6 weeks away from a murder that had been planned for 18 months. The final preparation. With all evidence compiled, our team spent the next week preparing for what Mark called the trial of the century. But this wouldn't be a quiet legal proceeding. Judge Mitchell had connections with local media, and he'd arranged for full television coverage. "Dorothy," he explained during our final strategy session, "your case represents something bigger than personal justice. Elder abuse costs American families over $36 billion annually. Most victims never get justice because they lack resources or die before cases can be prosecuted. What are you suggesting? Make your trial a teaching moment. Show the country that elderly people can fight back, that these crimes will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Mark Crawford had prepared what he called our shock and awe presentation. Video displays would show the timeline of August and Bruna's conspiracy. Financial experts would testify about their methodical theft. Medical experts would explain how they'd tried to poison me. Real estate specialists would detail their property fraud. But the centerpiece would be my own testimony. Not as a confused elderly victim, but as Dorothy Whitmore, one of the most powerful women in America who had chosen to live simply and had been targeted for murder by her own son. "We're going to destroy them," Mark said with satisfaction. "Not just legally, but publicly. By the time we're finished, August and Bruna will be the most hated people in Texas." Dr. Williams had prepared psychological profiles showing how their crime fit patterns of sociopathic behavior. Agent Chen had traced their connections to organized crime figures in 3 states. Ray Murphy had documented their previous victims and the suspicious deaths that followed their thefts. "One last thing," Judge Mitchell said as our final meeting concluded. "Dorothy, they're going to try to paint you as a vindictive old woman seeking revenge against her caring son. Are you prepared for character assassination?" I smiled. Not my practiced, harmless smile, but the cold smile my father had taught me for business negotiations. "Judge Mitchell," I said, "I spent 26 years in Boston society learning how to destroy people who underestimated me. Then I spent 45 years in Texas learning patience and strategy. August and Bruna are about to discover that the combination is lethal." The trial was set for Monday morning. By Sunday night, our war room looked like mission control preparing for a space launch. Every document organized, every witness prepared, every media contact primed for maximum impact. August and Bruna thought they were facing a confused old woman in court. They were about to face the concentrated fury of a billionaire heiress who'd been pushed too far. The Harris County Courthouse had never seen anything like it. By 8 a.m. on Monday morning, news vans lined the street for 3 blocks. Reporters from CNN, Fox News, NBC, and local Houston stations had transformed the courthouse steps into a media circus. Inside, the main courtroom was packed beyond capacity with spectators, journalists, and legal observers who'd come to witness what the Houston Chronicle was calling the trial of the century. Judge Henry Salz took his seat at exactly 9 a.m., his expression grave as he surveyed the crowded room. August and Bruna sat at the defendant's table with their court-appointed lawyer, a nervous young man named Peterson, who clearly understood he was about to be destroyed on national television. I entered the courtroom wearing a navy blue suit that had cost more than August's car, my first purchase as Dorothy Whitmore in 45 years. Mark Crawford walked beside me, carrying a briefcase that contained enough evidence to send my son to prison for the rest of his life. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The state of Texas versus August Sanders and Bruna Martinez Sanders, charges of conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, insurance fraud, and racketeering." August looked pale and thinner than I'd ever seen him. His cheap suit hung loosely on his frame, and his hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the defendant's table. Beside him, Bruna had attempted to dress conservatively for court, but her fake designer handbag and costume jewelry screamed desperation. Memento Viral 1. The Identity Revelation. Mark Crawford approached the witness stand where I sat, his movements deliberate and theatrical. Every eye in the packed courtroom was fixed on us. "Mrs. Sanders," he began formally, "please state your full legal name for the record." I looked directly at August, watching his face as I spoke. "Dorothy Ann Whitmore Sanders." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Salz had explained my true identity during preliminary hearings, but hearing it spoken aloud carried a different weight. Mark nodded and walked to our evidence table. With dramatic precision, he picked up a leather folder and opened it in front of the jury. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A, DNA analysis confirming Mrs. Sanders' identity as Dorothy Whitmore, missing heiress of the Whitmore Construction and Hotel Empire." He placed the first document on a projector, and suddenly the courtroom's large screen displayed scientific proof of my identity. Chromosomal matches, genealogical markers, irrefutable genetic evidence. Exhibit B, financial records showing the current value of the Whitmore Trust. The numbers appeared on screen in stark black and white. Whitmore Family Trust, current value, $897,000. Beneficiary, Dorothy Ann Whitmore. Status, active. August's mouth fell open. His lawyer dropped his pen. Even Judge Salz, who had known this was coming, seemed stunned to see the numbers displayed so boldly. Exhibit C, Mark continued, documentation showing that Mrs. Whitmore abandoned this fortune in 1979 to marry for love, choosing a simple life with mechanic Michael Sanders over wealth and social status. He showed photographs of my younger self at Boston Society events, newspaper clippings about my mysterious disappearance, and then wedding photos of Michael and me. An obvious contrast between wealth abandoned and love chosen. And Exhibit D, Mark's voice grew cold. Evidence showing that the defendants attempted to murder this remarkable woman for what they believed was a pension check and a small house. The courtroom erupted in whispers. August buried his face in his hands. Bruna stared at the screen with the expression of someone watching her entire world collapse. But Mark wasn't finished. Mrs. Whitmore, please tell the jury, if the defendants had succeeded in their plan, how much money would they have actually stolen? I looked at the jury, then at the packed gallery, then finally at my son. Based on current market valuations, August would have murdered me for approximately $897 million, though he believed he was killing me for about $47,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Momento Viral 2. The FBI arrives. As I finished my testimony, Mark Crawford checked his watch with theatrical precision. Your Honor, he announced, at this time, I'd like to call Federal Agent Sarah Chen to present additional evidence that has come to light during our investigation. The courtroom doors opened, and Agent Chen entered, followed by 6 FBI agents in dark suits. The defendant's table erupted in panic. What's happening? Bruna whispered frantically to their lawyer. Agent Chen approached the bench carrying a thick folder. Your Honor, during our investigation of the defendant's activities, we discovered evidence of additional federal crimes involving interstate commerce and organized crime connections. She opened her folder and began reading. August Sanders and Bruna Martinez Sanders are hereby charged with racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder across state lines. We have evidence linking them to the deaths of Eleanor Patterson and James Chen, elderly victims whose property was stolen using identical methods. The FBI agents moved with military precision. 2 positioned themselves behind August, 2 behind Bruna, 1 near their lawyer, and 1 by the courtroom exit. August Sanders, Agent Chen announced, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, racketeering, and operating a criminal enterprise. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent courtroom. August's face had gone completely white, and he swayed as if he might faint. Bruna Martinez Sanders, you are under arrest for the same charges. Bruna began to hyperventilate. This is insane, she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. She's a crazy old woman. We were trying to help her. The FBI agent behind her remained expressionless as he secured the handcuffs around her wrists. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Dorothy, August called out desperately as the agents prepared to lead him away. Mom, please, tell them this is all a misunderstanding. I stood up from the witness stand, my back straight, my voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. The only misunderstanding, August, is that you thought I was helpless. Momento Viral 3. The final confrontation. Judge Sally's called a brief recess before sentencing, and I found myself face to face with my son in the courthouse hallway. The FBI agent stood nearby, but they allowed us a moment to speak. August looked at me with tears streaming down his face. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I studied his face, the face I'd kissed goodnight for 18 years, the face that had smiled at me across birthday dinners and Christmas mornings. Now it was the face of a man who had planned my murder. Tell me something, August, I said quietly. When you forged my signature to sell my house, did you think about the oak tree your father planted when you were born? He flinched. Mom, when you bought that life insurance policy, did you consider that the $2 million you planned to collect was less than I spend on Christmas presents for charity? His shoulders shook with sobs. I didn't know who you really were. You knew exactly who I was, I said, my voice growing harder. I was your mother, the woman who worked 16-hour days to pay for your school clothes, the woman who sat by your hospital bed when you had pneumonia at age 7, the woman who never missed a single birthday, graduation, or important moment in your life. I know. But the debts? You chose gambling over honesty. You chose strangers over family. You chose murder over asking for help. August tried to reach for me, but the handcuffs stopped him short. Please, Mom, I'm still your son. I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the little boy who used to help me in my sewing room, who would bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers. My son died when you decided I was worth more dead than alive, I said finally. You're just a stranger wearing his face. The FBI agents stepped forward. Time's up. As they led August away, he called over his shoulder. What happens now? To us, I mean. I watched him being escorted down the long courthouse hallway, his expensive shoes echoing on the marble floor. 25 years in federal prison, I said loud enough for him to hear. No possibility of parole. The sentencing judge Salas returned to the bench 30 minutes later to deliver his sentence. The courtroom was still packed, cameras still rolling, the world still watching. August Sanders and Bruna Martinez Sanders, he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, insurance fraud, and racketeering. These crimes represent a level of calculated cruelty that shocks the conscience of this court. He paused, allowing the silence to emphasize his words. You targeted a woman who had given you everything, who had loved you unconditionally, who had sacrificed her own comfort for your welfare. You repaid her kindness with betrayal, her love with murder, her trust with theft. August sobbed openly. Bruna stared straight ahead with empty eyes. Furthermore, your crimes extend beyond this family. You have stolen from other elderly victims, contributing to their deaths through your systematic abuse. You have operated a criminal enterprise that preys on the most vulnerable members of our society. Judge Salles looked directly at the defendants. I hereby sentence you both to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. You will also pay restitution of $2.4 million to your victims' families and forfeit all assets acquired through criminal activity. The gavel came down with finality that echoed through the courthouse. As the FBI agents led August and Bruna away in chains, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but a profound sense of completion. For 45 years, I had hidden from power and wealth. Today, I had used both to protect not just myself, but every elderly person who might face similar betrayal. Outside the courthouse, Mark Crawford addressed the media while I stood beside him, no longer hiding behind the persona of helpless Dorothy Sanders. Today's verdict sends a clear message, he announced to the assembled reporters. Elder abuse will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and sometimes the elderly targets you choose to victimize are more powerful than you could possibly imagine. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the crowd of reporters and cameras that would carry my words across the country. My name is Dorothy Whitmore, I said clearly, and I want every elderly person watching to know you are not helpless, you are not powerless, and you are not alone. 6 months later, I stood on the wraparound porch of my new home in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood, watching the morning mist rise from Elliott Bay. The house, a restored 1920s craftsman with original hardwood floors and stained glass windows, was nothing like the modest Houston suburb where I'd hidden for 45 years. But then again, neither was I. The woman who had entered that Houston courthouse in November was gone. Dorothy Sanders, with her graying hair pulled into a tight bun, her homemade floral dresses, and her apologetic posture, had vanished completely. In her place stood Dorothy Whitmore, silver hair cut in a sleek bob, wearing a tailored emerald wool coat and Italian leather boots, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had reclaimed her birthright. My reflection in the hall mirror still surprised me sometimes. The transformation had been gradual, but complete. The timid stoop was gone, replaced by the straight-backed posture my finishing school teachers had drilled into me 60 years ago. The nervous smile had been replaced by something warmer, but infinitely more self-assured. Even my voice had changed, no longer the hesitant whisper of an apologetic elderly woman, but the clear, modulated tones of someone accustomed to being heard. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m., as it did every Tuesday. Through the beveled glass, I could see the familiar silhouette of Maria Santos, the Whitmore Institute's executive director, carrying her weekly briefing folder. "Good morning, Dorothy," Maria said as I opened the door. At 38, She was a former federal prosecutor who had left her practice to run the institute after her own grandmother fell victim to a scheme similar to August's. "Ready for the weekly updates?" "Always," I replied, leading her into my study, a room lined with legal books and furnished with a mahogany desk that had belonged to my grandfather. The Whitmore Institute for Family Justice had become everything I'd envisioned and more. In 6 months, we'd opened offices in 12 states, employed over 200 legal advocates, and helped more than 3,000 elderly victims of family abuse. The $800 million I'd dedicated to the cause was being used strategically, not just for individual cases, but to change laws, train law enforcement, and educate families about the warning signs of elder abuse. "The numbers are extraordinary," Maria said, spreading quarterly reports across my desk. "This month alone, we prevented 14 attempted guardianship frauds, recovered $8 million in stolen assets, and secured prison sentences for 37 family members who were exploiting elderly relatives." I studied the statistics with satisfaction, but it was the personal stories that moved me most. Letters arrived daily from elderly people across the country who had found the courage to fight back after hearing about my case. One letter, from a 74-year-old woman named Eleanor in Portland, had particularly touched me. "Mrs. Whitmore, my daughter was trying to steal my house using the same forged documents your son used. When I saw your story on the news, I realized I wasn't crazy or paranoid. I was being victimized. Thanks to your institute's lawyers, my daughter is now in prison and I'm safe in my own home. You saved my life." "There's more good news," Maria continued. "Congress is considering the Whitmore Act, federal legislation requiring additional safeguards for elderly people facing guardianship proceedings. Senator Williams believes it will pass by next year. The Whitmore Act. My name would be permanently attached to legislation protecting vulnerable elderly people. It was a legacy I could never have imagined when I was hiding behind homemade dresses and fake humility." "What about August and Bruna?" I asked, though I knew Maria would have information about their current status. "Federal prison, as expected. August is at the medium security facility in Beaumont. Bruna is at the women's federal prison in Fort Worth. No possibility of parole, as you know." I nodded. I felt no satisfaction in their imprisonment, but no regret either. They had made their choice when they decided an elderly woman's life was worth less than their gambling debts. "Any communication attempts?" "August writes letters every few weeks. His lawyer forwards them to our office as required by the restraining order. Mostly apologies and requests for financial assistance with his prison commissary account." I had read the first few letters, rambling, self-pitying screeds that blamed everyone but himself for his situation. After that, I'd instructed Maria to file them without showing them to me. The man who had planned my murder was dead to me in every way that mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Judge Henry Sals, who had become an unexpected friend. "Dorothy, turn on Channel 13. They're doing a feature on the Institute's anniversary." Maria and I moved to the living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Puget Sound. I turned on the television just as the news anchor began speaking. 6 months ago, the attempted murder of an elderly Houston woman exposed a nationwide epidemic of elder abuse. Today, the Whitmore Institute for Family Justice has become the country's leading advocate for elderly victims. The story featured interviews with families we'd helped, statistics about crimes we'd prevented, and footage of our newest office opening in Phoenix. But what struck me most was how they described me, not as a victim who had survived, but as a force for change who had transformed personal tragedy into systemic reform. "You know," Maria said as the segment ended, "you've become something of a legend. Law schools are teaching courses about your case. Social workers use your story in training programs. You fundamentally changed how America thinks about elder abuse." I walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd chosen to build my new life. Seattle had welcomed Dorothy Whitmore in a way that felt both familiar and fresh, a place where reinvention was respected and philanthropy was practiced seriously. My calendar was full but fulfilling. Board meetings for the Institute, speaking engagements at law schools, consultations with legislators drafting protective laws. This afternoon, I was having lunch with the mayor to discuss funding for a citywide elder abuse prevention program. Tomorrow, I was flying to Washington, D.C. to testify before a Senate subcommittee. At 71, I had finally become the woman I was meant to be before fear and love had driven me into hiding. The irony wasn't lost on me. It had taken my son's betrayal to free me from the prison I'd built around myself. "Maria," I said, turning from the window, "I want to establish a new program. Something for elderly people who are living in isolation, hiding from families or circumstances that hurt them years ago." "What did you have in mind?" "Safe houses, legal identity changes when necessary, financial assistance for people who want to reclaim their lives but don't know how." Maria smiled. "The Dorothy Sanders Recovery Program? Perfect." As Maria left with her new assignment, I remained by the window, watching ferries cross the bay under a brightening sky. Somewhere in federal prison, August was probably writing another letter I would never read. Somewhere in Texas, elderly people were being victimized by family members who believed they were helpless. But they weren't helpless. Not anymore. I had learned something profound in the past 6 months. It's never too late to become who you were meant to be. At 71, I was just getting started. My name is Dorothy Whitmore. I am a billionaire philanthropist, a survivor, and a force for justice. And I am exactly where I belong.